meeting were attached. I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes or any corrections.
I make a motion to approve.
Second.
Phil Berto moved. Dr. Goat second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. The next item, Michael and I've had quite a bit of conversation about this item. Several of you have expressed some concerns to the city manager and to myself and amongst ourselves, I think. And so I felt like we were moving pretty fast on what our task was, but there's certainly some ramifications out there when you look at our improvement plans and everything. A lot of that's not inside the city of Odessa, and of course that's where a lot of the impact fees would be most beneficial, is expanding city services. And with the sales tax issue and the I'm just going to quit talking and let Michael and the city attorneys take over from here. Michael, thank you much. Please, let's jump right into this and kind of flesh this out as much as we can today and see what impacts it may or may not have on what we're trying to accomplish.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your time back in December when you and I talked at length about this particular issue. And also want to acknowledge Natasha Brooks, who is our city attorney. She's on the call as well. For those of you who may not know, I think most of you already know that we have an outstanding issue with the county. A couple of years ago, the county established a county assistance district, and I can have Ms. Brooks go into more specifics, but essentially with that county assistance district in place, it really does have some dire consequences for the city of Odessa in terms of its growth. And you're right, Chairman Landgraf. This really does impact the work that the committee is looking at. Although I'm always going to try and be hopeful that things ultimately work out, there's no question that this is certainly a consideration as we begin to plan for our city's future. But essentially what has happened is with the implementation of the county assistance district, any property that's not currently within the city limits of Odessa can still be annexed by the city of Odessa. However, we will not be able to collect any sales tax that may be generated from that area. We would be relegated to, water, sewer, perhaps, and ad valorem. And as we begin to think about the development and growth of our city, we need to really look at this very from a holistic point of view. And I would anticipate, and certainly I would hope, that a lot of the new area that gets developed would have a certain amount of sales tax realization for the city. You may or may not know, but sales tax currently comprises the largest component of revenue for our community. It's almost 40% of what we generate every year in terms of general fund revenue. So it plays a huge role in operations. And certainly from the city's perspective, the introduction of the county assistance district again jeopardizes that ability for the city to generate those sales dollars, which ultimately impacts the city's ability to provide services. As you can imagine, the city annexing 10,000 acres and within that having to provide all the services that we currently provide to every resident, but without the benefit of the third of the dollars that are necessary to make that happen. So that, again, I think plays a significant role in our ability to grow. I am going to turn it over to the city attorney's office, and she can give you an update of how we got to this point and where we're currently at, because I think that's important for the committee to know, is where we're at today and what we anticipate as a result of requests for assistance, or an opinion rather, from the Attorney General's office. Natasha, you want to go ahead and kind of give them a little bit of history on the election itself, the wording that was associated with it, the interpretation or the publication by the Comptroller's office, and how that ultimately affected how the assistance district was put in place and impacts the city.
Hello, everyone. I'll just let you know I'm home with the virus also, so I'm actually fighting the virus at home. Let me see if I can find in my emails. Do all of you have the opinion that we sent to the Attorney General?
Natasha, they will probably not have that. No, ma'am.
Okay, because I think that's a good background for what's happened. Michael's covered mostly everything. When this went to the county for a vote, it did exclude the city of Odessa, and it also excluded the city of Goldsmith during that time. And so it didn't, nobody really looked at it because at that time, everybody thought that the county assistance district would just affect that the taxes would go just to the county. However, the way the wording was, the comptroller inserted some language that changed that. And I don't have it. I'm still trying to pull it up on my computer. And I may have to have Robert join the call because he can access that information a lot quicker than I can. In fact, let me reach out to Robert and see if he can pull up that information. Can we move on with something else right now?
Natasha, I'll see if I can't find, you're looking for just the opinion, correct? Or rather the letter that was sent to the AG?
Yes.
Okay, give me a second.
Joe, I see that you joined us. We're on item 3. We wanted to talk about city, county, the improvements district sales tax issue and what limitations that could have on our growth and future annexations. And obviously a big part of what we're looking at is impacted by that. So I think there's been some interest in trying to understand how that impacts what we could be doing. So that's kind of where we are right now. Thank you for joining us.
I thought Michael had already fixed that.
Trying to go. I think I found it. Let's see if I can't share that real quick. Natasha, is this it?
Yes, that's it right there.
Okay, all right. Was there a particular section you wanted me to move to, Natasha?
Let me try to find it, Michael. I had it pulled up and then my laptop did something very strange. And so, okay, I may have it. Okay. So I guess if you look at the argument portion, now I'm echoing. Do y'all, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm echoing to myself. But so in the argument section of the brief, which would be basically the first page of our brief, you'll see what some of our issues are. And we believe that that the local government code, it required the county at that time to give us notice that if the county assistant district was going to affect the city of Odessa, any territory of the city of Odessa, the law says that they have to provide us notice. The county has agreed that they did not provide us notice of the county assistance district. They didn't think they had to provide us notice because they don't feel like the ETJ is our territory. So that's the issues we have. So let me go back. So when we had this issue, what we did is we did try to sit down and speak with the county. That didn't go too well. And so what we did is we finally asked for an attorney general's opinion to decide this matter of the county assistance district. But we believe that the ETJ is our territory, and we should have the tax dollars in our ETJ. And so what our AG's opinion is doing is arguing those things to see if they can give us a ruling on the sales tax dollars, if that makes sense.
John, you had some questions the other day.
Yeah, I did, and Natasha, and I was led to believe that y'all are expecting a ruling hopefully by March or in March.
Well, the due date for our ruling is April 5th.
Okay, all right, April 5th.
Yes.
But then if the city of Odessa doesn't like the answer, they can appeal that. Or if Ector County doesn't like the answer, they can appeal that. And then this thing could be in the court system literally for years before we ever got a resolution, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, I've been told that by people that, think that it just takes one of you to not agree with that opinion, and it could even go, because of its uniqueness, to the state Supreme Court. Is that?
Well, right now, what that AG opinion is just that. It's an opinion. So we can live with the opinion, or we don't have to live with the opinion. So what we would have to do, our next step is either maybe go to mediation or to court on it. We could file suit. But it's just an AG opinion, so that wouldn't be anything that we would appeal. The next step would be that we would need to either, see if we can go to mediation or sit down with the county again and see if maybe we can come to some kind of resolution, or go to mediation, or we would have to file suit.
Okay. So again, we don't really know, and I don't know if that impacts a lot of what we're doing. I just, like I said, I knew that there were some discussions. Michael and I had some. I've had some with some of the other board members, and just wanted to kind of everybody to be on the same page that we don't really know whether we're going to be able to annex anytime in the immediate future, but that doesn't hinder us from continuing to do our efforts and put this in place. I see Michael nodding his head. Is that the way everybody sees this?
John, I think we need to view it in that light, because the city's going to have to grow one way or the other. And I think that the work that the group is doing right now, certainly this is something that stands to have a major impact on that. But I am hopeful that we'll be able to work through those issues. And we're going to grow no matter what. So having plans like this and having the land use assumptions and the project priorities picked out, I think is going to be important no matter what happens.
And John, to add to what Michael was saying, I think this is a discussion that you and I had, which is also, it's important to note that this is the plan that you guys are looking at right now is a 10-year plan. And so we always have the ability to come back and amend if needed, whether that's to, remove any projects if needed within a 2-5 year period, whatever the case is. We mandatorily have to update the plan every 5 years, but we can do so before that.
And that amendment to the plan is done by council action, right? This committee doesn't have to meet for 10 years or anything. Once the council adopts a plan, then they can modify it as things change, correct?
Well, and Jeff, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that the amendments do have to have committee input as well. So you guys do have to come back whenever we're reviewing the plan for amendments, and then make those recommendations to council. Okay.
So it really is a living document, as well as from that standpoint, which obviously in a growing community, that's a good thing, not a bad thing in my mind.
Yes.
John, this is John Atkins. The nuance that you talked about was if the plans stay the same, but the council decided to change the fee, if they enacted a fee, they would not need to go back through the process. They could change the fee if they wanted.
But anything changing of any of the land use assumptions or capital improvements plans or anything would come back to the committee, but the fees could be just done by the council.
That is correct.
Okay. All right. It is, and it's probably too early to tell since yesterday was their first meeting, but is the new council, I mean, we're doing this at the direction of the council. Are they good with where we're headed and what we're doing? Or
John, thanks for bringing that up. So as you can imagine, the new council has a lot of things to consider, right? A lot of the work that was initially approved by the prior council and certainly work that's currently underway. It is my intent to have Kimley Horn come in and meet with not only the previous council as a refresher, but to certainly give the new council a good overall review, if you will, of what we're trying to do with the impact fee and certainly what this committee is tasked to do. That's a great question. We haven't lost sight of that. We want the new council certainly to be as familiar with what we're doing and why we're doing it as the previous council was.
okay, yeah, good deal. Great. Okay. Any more questions from the committee on this sales tax issue of Michael or Natasha?
John, I would offer that if any of the committee members want to have an extended conversation, we can certainly have that conversation between myself and the city attorney's office. If they have more specific questions, they can always reach back out to us.
Not to be trying to bring up a bad subject or anything, but is there any discussion about any compromise or working through that? Or are we just going to wait till April and see how the chips fall?
Well, I mean, I guess there's always that opportunity, right, John? But I will tell you that anything short of 100% of that sales tax money coming back to the city would serve to create more of a burden on the current ratepayers.
Okay.
Well, I hate to be the fly in the ointment here, because I have talked to Michael about this, and John, you and I have talked about this. But this is definitely something the new council needs to look at, and the new mayor. And fighting this damn thing for years in the courts, and that's what it sounds like to me it's going to end up being. When I talk to the people I've talked to, it sounds like it's going to go to the Supreme Court, and you're talking about 2 or 3 years from now at least. It makes no sense that the two taxing entities who have everybody in this county as their people can't sit down and make an agreement. And I know I'm a little altruistic, but I've done it before, and it makes no sense that we're not doing that. And I'm afraid, personally, that if we go forth with this and specifically put down some dollar figures, then the county can use that against us.
Jimmy, I will tell you that, and I'm sure that this is part of Mrs. Brooks' plan, but I think she's had a conversation with the new council members related to this issue. And part of what I intend to do is to get this issue in front of them as a group, because at this point we've met with them, or she's met with them individually on this topic, but to get some sort of direction, and that may be the outcome, that they decide that the best course is to have some sort of negotiation. We don't know that yet. This is something that as I mentioned, is important that we get in front of them as a group, and that's something that is planned in the very near future. Rather.
Dr. Goetz, this is Natasha. And yes, I've spoken to the new council members about this, and I think it's something important that we do need to speak with the council as a whole now that they are briefed and they understand the issues. And I do think it's going to take some type of negotiation and compromise from both the city and the county. So I know that they seem willing to do that. And so I'm hoping that we can come to some resolve even before April the 5th.
That's the best thing I've heard, Natasha. Go Bears.
Good. Okay. Well, yeah, I think that's positive also. So, anybody that has any particulars or ideas or anything, certainly, Natasha and Michael or, city manager are available. So feel free to reach out, to them, and then we'll just, if there are no more questions, we'll go on to the next, item. Recap of schedule and discussion of in-person meetings. I was talking to Michael. I don't like these Zoom meetings very much. We've been doing them for almost a year now, it seems like. I don't think you get as much accomplished, and hoping that we might could do some in-person type of meetings. That seems to be less likely. It's just hard to find large enough places. Most of the large meeting rooms in town have been closed, I understand. So I don't know. What is there a feeling from the group about just continuing to do it this way, or do we have any thoughts of that? And then I'd like for Vanessa to recap our schedule again also, because I had some questions, or have had some people feel like we were rushing this thing a little bit, but I don't know if we are or not. But let's talk about those two items. Anybody have any input they'd like to say?
I'm open-minded to either one, but I do agree with you, Mr. Landgraf, that in person it just puts things in more perspective, and you can see what's going on. So if we can find a location where everybody feels comfortable, I would love to attend an in-person meeting.
So let me just if I may, Mr. Chairman, let me interject. Certainly, we can try and find a location. You know, what comes to mind is we always have access to the city's community buildings, Sherwood, Pal Gym. But we've also got consultants that we would have to have come in. So there would be some expense with them, I'm assuming, to travel to come to Odessa. But that's certainly a discussion we can have. If that's the committee's desire, we can certainly take that into account. But I just want to make sure that everybody's aware of that.
Okay. And Mike, I know you had some thoughts the other direction a little bit. You and I discussed. So.
Yeah, hang on. I had, I don't want us to go in here and be on a committee that's established by the city, and all of a sudden we create a COVID situation that gets publicized and all that. But I agree wholeheartedly. The Zoom meetings are too easy to be distracted, too easy to be not right on point on everything, and the in-person is way better. But again, I think it's going to have to be done with a lot of precautions and measures done properly, if we can get to that point.
Hey, Mike, if I can interject here, I think maybe our consultants can come in on a Zoom. I think us guys that form this committee, being in that wherever we can find to be together, and the consultants coming in and doing the presentation, we have access to asking questions. But once we finish the presentation, I think it would be good for us to be able to ask each other questions. Well, how do they feel and everything else? So I don't know if that's something that would be possible instead of having them.
That would certainly have less of an impact, Mr. Gonzalez.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
That'd be very good. We could all be more open with each other.
Good suggestion.
That's a great idea.
You like that too, Joe?
Yes.
Okay. Let's maybe move towards that for our next meeting. With that, let's will you recap the schedule for us, either Vanessa or Michael?
I'll let Vanessa handle that one, John.
Okay.
Yes, I can do that. April, will you put that slide up, please?
Yes, I believe John has access to and will be presenting on that schedule.
Okay.
Yeah, let me share my screen real quick with you.
And so if you guys recall, this is our third meeting. The first meeting was just a introduction of Impact Fees 101. The second meeting was where we introduced the land use assumptions and the impact fee CIP plans. This meeting was where we are scheduled to provide comments, and any comments or recommendations that came from this meeting were to be then presented to the council regarding only the land use assumptions and impact fee CIP. And it isn't until we're able to get those specific comments that we can then move forward with the financial analysis of what coming up with a maximum assessable impact fee per statutory loan, which we have slated for our February meeting to be able to review that with you all. And then in our March meeting, we would discuss and formulate written recommendations to council on the actual impact fee. And then we did have built in a meeting in April in case we needed to push any of these forward, or if we needed to build in an additional meeting for any additional discussion that the committee wanted to move forward on.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I guess that goes back then to what we talked about at our last meeting, and maybe this is part of John Atkins' presentation today, is we wanted to understand what other communities are doing about impact fees, other community our size, other West Texas communities, see what those other options are, and maybe understand those issues before we get into really determining maximum accessible impact fees and stuff, which is pretty quickly. If it's going to be the 10th of next month, I think we need to understand how other people are doing it. And then that also brought up the question that Dr. Goetz and I briefly visited about is, and Michael and I talked about it also, what did the city of Odessa do before today? What have we done without impact fees, and how have we made capital improvements in the past? And I know there's multiple answers to that, because Jimmy and I remember different things from the way they were done over the last 30 and 40 years. But I think the group would like to understand that, and why we can't do, I'm not saying why we can't do, what the difference is today from 1988. What's the difference today from 1995, and how we finance all of the things that we did in the past. So I think those things we sure need to look at before we start trying to determine the maximum accessible impact fees, in my opinion.
John, I think I can take a part of that. And
we need to look at the history, and history is very important, whether we don't want to repeat it or we do want to repeat it. And I'm not sure that everybody on the committee, I know Philberto served, but not everybody knows what was going on in the last 30 or 40 years as to how we did things, how we got to where we are now. And I'd just like to have a history of that, and then talk about what these other cities are doing. I know you and I have talked, and we both looked at different cities and the way they're doing it. So I'd like to see those things talked about.
Okay. Dr. Goetz, I think I can, I've been around a little bit, so I know some of that. And John, you and I did talk briefly about this, and I certainly understand the question, and I can appreciate the question. This is obviously impact fees are going to be new to this community. They're new to a lot of communities in West Texas, and I'm sure John will talk about that. But I think it's important to try and answer your questions first about what we've done in the past, so we know why we're here today. And again, I know Mr. Atkins will talk in some detail about what the impact fee is and how that's different than perhaps what we've done in the past. So Jimmy, certainly back when you were on the council, the city grew just like we're growing now, certainly not at the same rate, but there was, as you well know, demand for infrastructure and demand for water and sewer and all those things that precipitated the growth that's already happened in this community. And I think your question evolves and how are we able to finance those sort of projects then, and why are we looking at impact fees today? Cindy Munsey is also on the line, so she can certainly help me with this. But in years past, when we had to, for example, provide water to a new area, and I think the Parks Bell is a great example of that. Water was needed out in that development, and somebody had to pay for it. The city had to figure out how we were going to do that, and we paid that by what we have always done. And if the question is how have we paid for projects in the past? It's been primarily through the issuance of debt, general obligation stuff, bonds, or water sewer debt. And that's how we've managed to provide water and sewer to the areas that didn't have it before. That's how we've managed to provide roads. That's how we've managed to provide money for participation on roads when the developer pays a portion and the city pays a portion. But the short answer is that we've generally issued debt, or Jimmy, you may recall, and I know Mr. Gonzalez, you recall, at times we would do projects through supplemental requests, and those would be monies or excess sales tax dollars that were not left over, but weren't necessarily allocated, and we would petition the council for projects. And sometimes those were public works projects in order to get some of the new infrastructure built. But primarily it's been through the issuance of debt that we've been able to do some of those projects. That hasn't changed. The city still has to come up with the money first. We have done projects, for example, I'll use 87th Street. We used a mechanism that was called the pro rata. If you folks remember what 82nd Street used to be like, it was probably a 4-lane road or a 5-lane road up until you got to, I guess, the east part of that, and it went down to a 2-lane county road. We knew the development was going to happen there, but there was no real way to get the developers to participate in that because they weren't ready for a project. We recognized that. We knew that road needed to be upgraded then, and it really couldn't wait for the development to happen. So we, in conjunction with all the property owners, including Mr. Hurt, came up with pro rata agreements that would allow the city to build that infrastructure first and then be paid back as those properties were platted. So debt and pro rata have been primarily the two key ways that we've been able to develop infrastructure.
Correct.
Michael, when you do a pro rata, is there a mechanism, and this may be more for Cindy or Natasha, but is there a mechanism that you can charge whatever your interest, your carrying cost is, so that it's not the same $100 a foot? Next year it's $102 a foot, or whatever those numbers might be, so that, because I know some of the pro ratas take many, many years to pay out, and the city loses money on it because if they issue debt, they're paying interest on that, and they don't ever get whole. But if they could get whole on it, it would make a difference, I think, in the way you could structure some projects.
Cindy, you want to take that one?
I mean, I think there's that opportunity to do that, John. I don't know that we built that into the 87th Street one. Vanessa may know more about that, but I think there is a way to do that.
Okay.
So we can obviously look into that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Jimmy, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's been as I mentioned, those have been the primary mechanisms that we've used to build the infrastructure that we have up to this point.
Yes, I understand. I, of course, knew that since I served from 1990 for several years.
Sure.
But I wanted everybody else to hear that, because there are other ways to do this besides just impact fees. And we have done this for many, many years that way. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And Cindy, yes, we did. And I think when we did Line H, we also put a pro rata in Line H as we developed out toward the north. So I think we also had a pro rata plus a bump in that because we knew it was going to take 20 or 30 years to develop.
Right, and I think one of the things that we're considering in the idea of impact fees is that, you know, that growth that we talked about with line H was a 20-year growth that we were looking at. If you look at what's happened to us in the last 5-6 years, it was pretty rapid. And so that growth has hit us a whole lot harder in the last few years than it did, you know, the 20 years prior to that. So I think that's one of the nuances to why we're looking at, is there any other options out there?
Cindy, and I'll add to that. And I know, Jimmy, when you were here, and certainly Mr. Gonzalez, when you were here, you saw more and more projects coming before you when we did issue debt. Very little of that, quite frankly, was set aside for new development. The bulk of that was set aside for rehab of existing infrastructure. That hasn't changed. That, matter of fact, that's been amplified. We've got crumbling infrastructure all over the city. If we look at our last water sewer debt, Cindy, you can remind me, but probably 70%, if not more, was set aside for rehab projects, and not necessarily a whole lot was set aside for a new development. Correct?
That's correct.
So that trend
that's normal. That's normal development. You always put back in your budget for what's happening, and it's happened over the last 50 years because something's going to break down. That's always in your budget. Development is something totally different, and you have to look to the future for development. You can't always budget for that. That's why you do have the debt value, that you can do debt to do that. I'm not against the impact fees at all. I just want all of us to have a really good understanding of what we can and we can't do. And the first two meetings, not John Landgraf, but John Atkins, never spoke about anything else except for impact fees. And so there are a few of us who wanted to make sure everybody understood there are more than one vehicle and there's more than one way to do things.
That's a good observation, Jimmy. And I'll take you folks to how we got to this point. So as the city council and as we were developing our master plans, the water sewer master plan and the road master plan, the council was obviously alarmed at the total number of dollars that we're really talking about when it comes to replacing infrastructure and new infrastructure. So their direction to us as a staff is to talk about the multiple ways that we could possibly fund this. And Jimmy, you're right. We talked first and foremost about debt issuance. We talked about, was there ability to do some more pro rata work? The other thing that we talked about was impact fees, because at that time, Midland was working on theirs. Council members that were on council understood what was happening in Midland, and they directed us to pursue this as another option. So what we're really talking about is impact fees will be another option that they can consider in order to generate the revenue that's necessary in order to help us to continue to grow. That's how we got here, Jimmy.
I understand, Michael. And another thing that I think, both John, that we need to look at is where we can use impact fees and where we can't use impact fees. Because if we are hogtied by this sales tax situation, Landgraf and I were looking at, there's a lot of property within our ETJ and within our city that we can attach to now. Can we use impact fees on those areas? When I asked that question the first meeting, John basically told me no.
Jimmy, this is Philly. I'll just letting you know. And some of the research that I've done, and I met with the mayor the ex-mayor of Midland and their director of utilities. They're doing the impact fees over there. And one of the things that really caught my attention was the flexible option that the impact fees are. Because from what I understood, I took from the meeting was you can go back into the city and look at certain developments and set a certain price, a certain impact fee, right, Mike, if I'm not correct?
Well, Midland has, as ultimately we'll have the city marked up in coordinates
Yes.
rather. And depending on the development that occurs in that, as Midland has, you've got fees for one area that may be higher than another.
Mm-hmm. And one of the ways that they explained it to me was the unfairness for a new developer to come into the city of Odessa where there's a plot of land, and now they tie into the city and they don't pay into the cost of adding the infrastructure there. The impact fees to that development will help with the cost, right, Mike?
Yes, sir. To help offset the cost.
Yes.
Obviously, they don't take up the entire cost of that, but offset some of it.
And the other one was about and I still want to learn more about that, was there's credits that can be given to the developers that can be used to offset the cost also. So in the long run, I mean, there's a lot of components that make the impact fees. And so I'm learning, Mr. Landgraf, to your comment about, are we going too fast? Probably because I don't know a lot about the impact fee. So we're trying to learn, and that's what makes it feel like, are we going too fast? If we were going to say that, I would say that it would be because of that. But it is a new vehicle, and that's the vehicle that I'm looking at as, we have the responsibility of looking at it to make sure that it's not a rock unturned, to make sure that we give the city of Odessa the right tools to be able to take care of an aging infrastructure.
Right, and I agree with you, Philly, and I respect what you're saying. I think we've kind of hit this. I guess let's turn this over to Mr. John Atkins, and he has probably a sense of where we are as the committee and what we need to know, what we know and what we need to know. So John, fill us in.
John, this talker, if I could just real quick, Dr. Goetz, and I understand that like y'all were mentioning that what we've been talking about is the impact fees. I just want to reference that John Atkins was there. The consultant was hired specifically to look at impact fees. I know a lot of the information y'all are looking for, we're still needing to pull together as far as historically how we've done things and the opportunities or commitments of funds. But I just wanted to touch on, that's probably one of the reasons that you hear mostly about impact fees from the consultant is that this was specifically their task.
Yeah. No, yes. Thank you, Tom, and I appreciate that input. John, you want to take it from here, and please, sir?
I'm not quite sure where to go, to be honest. And what I mean by that is, if you want us to give some examples of how the processes work out in a couple of cities in West Texas, I would probably turn it over to Jeff Whitaker, who's worked on the roadway projects both in Lubbock and Midland. If you want to get a little bit of history of how it's come about there. From a context, this is a nuance, but a unique context about the difference between water and sewer and the roadway. The law requires that the roadway impact fee only be calculated in relationship to your current city limits. So the analysis that's been done and the numbers that you would receive with regards to the roadway impact fee don't go beyond the current city limits. So if you decided to move forward on that side of things, that would be totally independent of the issue that y'all are dealing with from a sales tax standpoint. So that's just a nuance in the middle of this. Now, the water and sewer does extend outside the city limits into the ETJ. So that is a unique issue. So I'm going to kick it over to Jeff and let him give you kind of the story on those other two cities that he's worked in and some of the kind of questions and issues that those communities did it for the very first time and may have had the similar questions that y'all are asking now. And he can tell you about that experience.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, John. So I worked on Midlands and impact fee from the beginning, and both the advisory committees had similar questions to you. Impact fees are new to West Texas. A lot of the question is, why are we considering the impact fees? And most of the time, what has happened over the last, I'll say 10 years or 15 years, Texas, including West Texas, has grown at record pace rates. And also a lot of the maintenance on sides of projects, when you think you're always having to plan for maintenance, but as cities get bigger, the maintenance has been put off. And some of that maintenance that you should maintain every 20 years is now coming to a 50-year life cycle. So maintenance costs are getting into reconstruction cost. So it's no longer minor maintenance, it's major maintenance cost. So that's something to consider. But I'll start with Midland. I think Midland was trying to figure out how to fund major projects to allow development to continue to occur. They had some major sewer issues to be able to open up land for development that just needed to get built, and there was really no way to fund. So they were looking for an alternative funding source to help convey sewer to their treatment plant. I'm not a water and wastewater person, so John or Tom, if I mentioned something a little off, let me know. But that was their main emphasis of how do we diversify our portfolio and allow development to pay into this pool of money that can allow us to build the infrastructure needed to serve the growth that they're going forward. So when we were working in Midland, the Capital Improvement Advisory Committee, the role that you're serving, had very little conversation really about water and wastewater. They felt like there needed to be an extra funding source to help allow the debt service to build towards paying these future water and wastewater. There was a lot of discussion on roadways in Midland about how the roads would be funding, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, the case was painted much like in Odessa, where there's a master plan that states roughly $85 million worth of 10-year needs on the capital side of roadways, and also roughly needs about $10 million a year on the maintenance side, of which Odessa is currently funding around $5 million a year on maintenance. So if you can imagine, every year, the maintenance in Odessa is going kind of down on the maintenance because they're not funding at $10 million a year. So there's a gap out there. And so Midland recognized that there's a funding gap on roadways as well. It just wasn't as emphasized by their advisory committee. Moving forward, they adopted, but a lot of discussion, a lot of the similar questions you had. And they were the first. They didn't have any West Texas cities to look to saying, hey, what has been done? And they actually made the decision to look at themselves and their needs. So we didn't really compare Midland with a lot of other communities. Going to Lubbock, it was the opposite situation. They had some funding sources that had allowed them to stay in front of development on the roadway side and allowed the infrastructure to get built, but that funding was no longer there. There were some funding sources called the Gateway funding, et cetera, and they just weren't able to build new roadway infrastructure. And they had about $120 million of existing needs of roadways that they felt they needed to put on the ground today that they had no funding for, and they were concerned of what's going to happen over the next 5 years. So when we met with their Capital Improvement Advisory Committee, there was clear indication of what to do on roadways. Almost every member, I think, of that committee agreed they needed some solution to be able to get roadway infrastructure built so that they could extend along their grid network. Right? Keep moving towards that the solutions that they had weren't working. The city had no partnership available. That's the big thing in Lubbock, is when developers would come to the city and ask for participation for a roadway project, there was really no funding source for the city to be able to participate. So impact fees would allow developers who were building to pay towards a fund that the city could pay with the developer on building a roadway. So Lubbock, the discussion of why impact fees on roadway never occurred, it was kind of like given. There was a lot of discussion opposite of Midland on water and wastewater. They felt like their water and wastewater fund was adequately serving their maintenance and capital needs, and there wasn't a need to go forward. So a lot of discussion occurred upon that. So if you look into Midland, they adopted water, wastewater, and roadway impact fees. Lubbock adopted only roadway impact fees. They did not adopt water and wastewater. That is a quick summary of impact fees for those areas. Lubbock did use pro rata for their water and wastewater. There was a lot of discussion about the pros and cons of that during that process. But like I said, they end up, I guess, sticking to that methodology as opposed to moving forward impact fees. It just wasn't the right tool. One thing that the council did there is they adopted a zero rate for impact fees for water and wastewater. And there's some nuances behind that. As John mentioned earlier, you can adjust the rate. So if a future council wanted to change the rate, they potentially could and not have to restudy the whole system and, et cetera. So they when I said they didn't adopt impact fees, they technically did. They adopted roadway, water, and wastewater. They just set the water and wastewater rate at zero in a sense. So they didn't have to go through the restudy if future council, or they had a need in the future. And actually what their advisory committee suggested, much like it's all needs based, that they have a future water extension, and I don't know the name of there's a big water project that they have in the future, but they think it's like 15 years in the future and they don't need to plan for it now. And all the council said is they were concerned if the need comes up, they may have to have another funding source for that. And I use the funding source a lot. So all the discussions in West Texas was kind of a pie chart is how I look at it. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but if you had $100 million of your needs, impact fees, and I think you've shown this slide before. I think if you took water and wastewater and roadway needs over the next 10 years that we're projecting in Odessa on the capital side, it's roughly $350 million. And if you were to adopt a rate similar to Midland, it funded about 10% of that need. So it's just an extra tool in the toolbox. You still have to cover potentially the other 90% or so. But it allows another course to elevate that. So I talked a lot, but that's an overview of Midland and Lubbock. So I'll pause for questions.
Jeff, John Langler, did Lubbock change their water and sewer rate? They have a separate water and sewer fund, I'm certain, like Odessa does, and they're funding everything out of that. Did they change those rates and up those so that they didn't have to have the impact fee, or they already were solvent? Or give us a little history on that, because maybe your rate structure, and Cindy can probably help us with what Odessa's doing and where we are solvent on our water and sewer.
And I would love a lot of detail. I don't know about the rate structure. I can tell you what I heard in the meetings. New Gen Solution Strategies, who's a partner with us on this project, did the rate study for Lubbock. So they could probably provide more detail, but they're not on this call today, so we could get that information back to you. But the short answer is, like every project, you do a 5-year capital plan, and their current rate structure showed that with what they had in their CIP, I believe, and this is where I don't quote me on, I think the water wastewater base rate had to go up a nickel, and the wastewater rate had to go up a nickel, and the water rate had to go up $1 to cover that rate. And they felt like that was okay. So it wasn't a substantial increase, but they had done their plan, and I don't know the details behind Odessa's water and wastewater plan, but they felt like their current rate structure was adequate to cover. That's why they decided to set a rate of 0.
John Atkins, did y'all look at our rate structure as part of your master plan for water and wastewater?
Yeah, we had New Gen Strategies on board during the master planning, and they actually did a pro forma to look at how you would need to finance and what your rates might have to change to build the infrastructure that was proposed in the master plan. So that was part of our master plan.
So that's part of what we need to be considering when we're considering these impact fees. That maybe it doesn't all have to be from impact fees. It could be from rates, some portion from rate structure, or is that not part of our task?
Well, technically it's not, John. I think what you want to look at the finance side of things, we ought to do it.
I didn't hear anything.
There's a bad echo. I'm not sure. Everybody needs to be the exception of who's talking that facilitate that. So I'm not sure who's causing the echo. That helps, I think. Is it better? Yep.
Yes.
Okay. All right, John. So here's my thought listening to all this. One of the steps for us as far as moving forward and looking at numbers, and of course that's the next 2 meetings and potentially 3 that was shown on the schedule, were to talk about the dollars. The one thing that we were asking, the step that we're here tonight to get y'all's comments is, we can't finalize the dollars until we feel like, or y'all feel comfortable that the CIP and the land use seem appropriate. Now, if y'all don't want to say, yeah, it's appropriate, you could direct the city staff or via us, or however you want to look at it, and say, you know something, let's assume it's appropriate right now. Go ahead and finalize the financial component of this, and that way we'll have real city numbers of what your impact fee could be. And then we can then take that data plus the pro forma that was performed during the master planning exercise and look at the city's finances to some level. Now there's some work that needs to be done, and we need to get with your staff. And then it could be like the exhibit that Jeff just talked about, where we do it in a pie chart or something like that, that shows here are your needs over the next 10 years when it comes to capital growth. Here is how you would pay for those. And it slices the pie chart up. You know, a big part of that being, you know, revenue funded. If you talk about water and sewer, the only way you really pay for it is you sell bond. You can sell bonds for big projects, or you can cash fund it, but it's all some form of your revenues. I mean, that's the only way you get money in. A slice of that, you could not show some of the revenue, and you could show some of that being paid for via impact fees into the future. Of course, you got to build up. If you implement them, they don't instantaneously give you money within a year. You know, they build up over time as development comes into the community. So, but you can take the assumptions that we have in the report and use those to develop some of those revenue assumptions. So let me let Jeff, I think he wants to jump in here and say something about in respect to that.
Yeah, I think a process on impact fee, and I think there's a 3-step process. It can be kind of confusing. We may not have outlaid this very well. Obviously, our task is to evaluate impact fees and to work through this committee with the impact fees, and we understand that that's our charge. But the first step typically in the process is the planning step, and it's a little confusing because Odessa just did a pretty detailed, water, wastewater, and transportation plan, and we're kind of showing you a lot of the same results from that with the growth and with the projects that we're showing. But if you want to say the 3 steps, there's a planning step, and then there's the math step, which I call that's what John was describing. What is fees? What is the resulting math? And then there's the policy step. And I think a lot of folks on here, and sometimes you can put the policy step first, but it can be a little bit confusing because we don't know what the math turns out. We don't know if that would. So one of the considerations for this group is, for example, in Lubbock, we really, if you took all the meetings we met, we focused when we got down to the policy side. We said, we know we're going to do this stuff. Let's get everything out in front of us. Let's get to the policy. But it's just an idea of kind of, if you're thinking about the impact fee process, break it down to the planning part. That's where we are now. That's the projects and the growth. Then the next meeting was about the math. What does the math show? And then the following meeting was more about, if you will, policy. And for example, for Lubbock, their recommendation from their committee was their policy recommendation to the council, which is just a recommendation to the council, was not to adopt the water and wastewater and to move forward with roadway at this rate. That was their recommendation. So I don't know if that helps John, our committee, break it down to nuggets of how we kind of sometimes approach the project.
I think it does very much, and that helps me understand. And I want to say, like Dr. Goetz did, I'm not opposed to impact fees at all. I know we have tremendous capital needs. I'm just trying to make sure we consider all of the ways to get there and the combinations in this pie chart and understanding that once we get to the, and so I'm probably jumping, because I think the, my personal opinion is our projects and our population projection and everything that y'all have done there looks great. And of course, I've been familiar with that off and on for the last couple of years. So I don't have any issues there. I was probably jumping past that, trying to figure out the dollar part of it, but we'll wait and do that in the next meeting or two.
And I think the direction you want to give us, that we can do that if you said, hey, let's just dive into the details. We'll eventually need your formal recommendations on the plan, because that's a requirement of state law. We'll need this body to tell us, like, hey, we're good with the CIP, we're good with the land use assumptions if you are. And we can put that, start diving into the policy and getting into the details. We did want to dive into the policy if someone said, hey, you know what, we don't, that might affect something.
Okay, well, let's stay on track like we're supposed to then, and let's talk about the land use assumptions and capital improvements plan.
Mr. Landgraf, I have an ask. I don't know how realistic this is, but I think this would be for Mike. But Jeff said a very key word for me that made me want to ask this question. The key word was positives and negatives. What are the positives and negatives for the impact fees? What are the positive and negatives to issuing debt? What is the positive and negatives? What's the other one that y'all mentioned, that there was another vehicle for us to be able to pay for this? Is that a possibility, Mr. Marrero, that we could have some of that?
We can pull together any information that the committee thinks they need. And let me just say, if there are questions, committee, we really need the feedback from you guys, because when as we're presenting these, it is our hope that we're trying to answer all the questions along the way. And if we're not, please let us know. We can certainly Jeff and John. But to your direct question, Philly, certainly we can lay out what mechanisms there are and tell you how we've used them in the past and how they best can be used. But I think you've got to consider this as being kind of a much bigger picture, if you will.
Okay.
Everything plays a role, and including impact fees, right? That also plays a role. That's just another tool, if you will, that the council can look to in order to meet its current and future infrastructure demands.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
John Landgraf, I think, and I finally feel like you and I may have gotten the horse before the cart here, and I understand what Mr. Atkins is telling us now, and Jeff. So let's look at the land use assumptions and see if we agree to. Everybody sitting here thinks that's okay. And those are humongous documents. I guarantee you not everybody in here has read them all, because if you have, you've got something else to do that I don't. And also the CIP improvement plan. That's a huge document again. And that's really what Mr. Atkins is asking us to do today. Is that correct, John?
That's correct. And I was in a real simplified version. I'm just going to show you that information again and then just reiterate it. It seems like a lot, but it's work that's already been done by the city through the comprehensive plan and your current master plans and thoroughfare plan. So the city has gone about this in the correct way. They have stepped through the process through the planning side over the several years now. And then this is a next step that couldn't occur unless the planning work was done ahead of time. So the city's gone about it the correct way. And we are just utilizing that information to create the information that's very specific for the 10-year window that the law tells us the way we're supposed to do this. So I'll be happy to I'm going to show you stuff that I showed you last time. And if it comes down to really what CICs do at this point is typically they don't have a lot of comments if the city's done a good job of planning on the front end side already, which you've already done with your comprehensive plan and your master plans, water and wastewater master plans and your thoroughfare plans. If we just take that data and narrow it down to a 10-year window, and if it seems to correspond to that, the committee goes, yes, we think what you've done is reasonable compared to our current plans, continue on with the study. And that's really where we're at today. So what I can do is just step through the exhibits one more time and just show you what we introduced to you last time, and then see if you have any comments. And if you think it's reasonable, you can say, yes, we think the land use assumptions and the impact fee capital improvements plan is reasonable. Please continue and complete the study so we can see what the numbers look like. And that's the numbers side of things that we'll take on that task, and we can complete fairly quickly. And then that's what we would bring forward to you next month to talk. And I think that's what we really want to get into. And it's great for engineers, and John understands this. If the numbers are really there, it sure makes a lot more sense versus talking hypotheticals.
John, go ahead and do your presentation, because I agree. I think we got maybe off track a little bit, but I think it's important for us to all understand the bigger picture. And I appreciate Michael and Tom and Cindy and everybody's input on that, and certainly what you and Jeff have added. I think we're now ready to hear your presentation on the land use plan and the capital improvements plan. Please, thank you.
Okay, I'll share my screen, and don't hesitate to ask a question, or we'll just walk through it. I really simplified it down here, so let me share my screen. All right, can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Land use assumptions. Okay. Well, and I lost the other screen here to help me get through the process. Okay, to go back to what we looked at before, in summary, this is your ultimate land use plan that we presented for you, and it broke down predominantly by residential, non-residential, and the rest public right-of-way. And what we reiterated here was the balance that the city has from a planning standpoint is sound. And we feel like it's the appropriate land use types throughout the city. The next thing we talked about in association with land use was your growth rate. And if you remember, the result of this was an average growth rate around 1.3%. What we've seen historically over probably the last 5 years is y'all have grown closer to about 2%. The comprehensive plan that was done projected about 1%. So what we did with our study was drill down a little more tightly. And what I mean drill down is we drilled down a little bit more of area specific and tried to identify varying growth rates throughout the city, of course, working with the planning department. And when we did this, we didn't know what the answer was going to be. And then the result of the cumulative of that was a growth rate of about 1.3%. And we felt this was a reasonable number because it was higher, a little bit higher than what your comprehensive plan said, but it was lower than what you've actually experienced in the last 5 years. So we thought it was a good balance. And then we thought it was a little bit more realistic as far as regionally in the area where things were going to grow a little bit quicker than others. So that's how we came to the conclusion on this part. So before I go to the CIP part that serves this growth area, does anybody have any questions or comments about what we presented on the land use side?
John, I'll make the motion that we approve the land use assumptions. I think they look very good.
Okay, we're going to do this in two parts, John Atkins. That's okay.
That's perfectly fine.
Okay, we have a motion to accept the 10-year growth assumptions on the land use plan. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Any other discussions or questions for John Atkins or the staff or any of the consultants? Okay, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, all right, John, we've got that.
Okay. Well, let's proceed to the capital improvements plan, the impact fee capital improvements plan. Just to reiterate, the service area that's defined to where the capital improvement plan will be. Here's the water service area. Here's the wastewater service area. You can basically see it's the same areas. And of course, roadway, because of mile limitations, we had to break the city up into 3 pieces. Service areas 1, 2, and 3 that you see here. And then you also see that it just is limited to the city limits. So it does not extend as large as the water and sewer service areas do. So that's just additional information about where the planning areas are for the 3 components of the impact fee. So to continue to move forward, the impact fee capital improvements plan. Here are the resulting projects for water. Now, these projects weren't created during the impact fee study. These were pulled from your current master plans and then looked at for the 10-year planning window. And so obviously you see most of the projects are in that higher growth area. And you're correct, many of this outer limits part is outside of your current city limits. Some of the projects are within that. And then the other area was growth related that we saw down in the southwest part of town. Now, some of these projects are actually shoring up some fire flow deficiencies, but there is also built into the projects being able to serve future growth down in this southwest part of town also. So that's what the water impact fee looks like. Of course, there's a lot of
Can I ask you a question, John?
Yes, sir.
John, is ECUD involved in this CIP plan at all?
They are not. No. The short answer is no. We did a separate plan for them, and that obviously that's the area out.
Right. And the area that ConocoPhillips helped us put in down toward Pleasant Farms, that's not involved in this either, right?
That is correct. We took the land use plan the master land use plan that you saw on the first slide for the land use part, along with the growth rate numbers that you saw in the second part. And that's how we formulated where the demand was going to occur and the infrastructure needed to serve that area, those areas. That's how it wasn't based on the specific information you're talking about.
Perfect.
Jimmy, you bring up a great point. That water that is south, that's outside the city, was privately funded, and that's not part of what we're looking at. And if there's some more of those types of issues, groundwater issues that spawn that, those would also probably be privately funded and would not have a direct impact on the city's finances, correct? Isn't that what y'all did, Dr. Goetz, when you made that deal?
Do what?
I say, when y'all made that deal, that was privately funded and did not really impact the debt or finances of the city of Odessa. That was paid for because of some groundwater issues, the stuff south of town.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So that wouldn't be part of, and if we have more of those, which we very easily could, they would additionally be privately funded. So they would not be involved in any of this capital improvements the way I looked at it. Because I had that same question initially, but then it went through that part of it in my mind.
That's true, John. those areas are not generally part of necessarily our growth plan. They occur, like you said, because of some environmental impact, and several of them now the EPA actually comes in and builds the extensions in. They're usually not quite as large or as extensive as the Ventus conifers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks, guys.
Any other questions on the water impact fee capital improvement plan? Okay, hearing none, I'll go ahead and move to the wastewater impact fee CIP. Similar type philosophy here, where we're showing projects to serve future growth in the northeast, predominantly in the southwest. Of course, there's a major pipeline that we need to extend to the wastewater treatment plant on the south side of town. It ultimately serves this eastern corridor. It also serves a significant portion of the existing city. So when we do the math in here, not all of this project is attributable to new growth. A portion of it serves existing. So we take out the dollars that serve existing, and just in the math exercise, we reduce the recoverable dollars for impact fees with regards to that specific project. That's a nuance in there that we will show you some of that information the next time we come forward. Or the math part of it, as Jeff called it. So any questions on the wastewater impact fee CIP? And once again, this is just information that we have pulled out of your current master plans and then narrowed the focus to your 10-year planning window. Okay, hearing no questions, I'll move to roadway. Of course, this is broken up into the three service areas that we talked about. And I can let Jeff, if you would like to speak about the roadway projects, much more knowledgeable than me, of course.
No, we utilized the recently adopted transportation master plan to outline the roadway projects. All I'll point out is it's a combination of new projects, which are streets that don't exist, widening projects, which are future streets. We can include some planning and corridor studies. So we have a corridor study project in there, and then we also include intersection projects. One thing to note is that when we actually do the math, as John pointed out, is we can only include the portion of the project that's needed by growth. So some of the widening projects already are serving existing traffic, so we can't include that portion of the cost. So we have to, it's not the entire cost of the CIP that would be on the impact fee CIP, but these are the projects that are eligible for the impact fee CIP. So there are 4 of these projects, and there's 3 different maps associated. So let's move on to service area 2. Very similar. Service area 2 has a lot more of the core of the city, and so there's less projects. There's 1 new project, 3 widening projects, and several intersection projects. That's pretty common when you get to a kind of a more developed part of a community, is that you'll see more intersection projects to help improve traffic flow, and maybe less roadway projects. And service area 3 is where a lot of the growth is occurring, and you'll see some projects on here. And one thing to note is that some projects may be under design or funded by the city. The city can recover debt service on projects that were built in anticipation for growth. So some projects that you're intending to accommodate future growth that you're building now or that have built in the past, you can include a portion of that project cost. So this is you'll see a lot more new projects in service area 3.
Jeff, can a CIP be amended to where we come back inside the city in an area that has a giant need of rehab and build new roads and new service areas to those areas to actually develop and increase use of our already there infrastructure? Can we use those kind of things?
For impact, I'm going to try to answer your question in 2 ways. For impact fees, we cannot do rehab or maintenance with them. They have to be for widening or a new capacity, new roadways or widening, or intersection improvements that increase traffic flow. We can't use it to seal coat, overlay, or maintenance, et cetera.
No, I'm talking about going in and destroying a part of town and rebuilding it. So it would be new road structure because you're going to have more vehicles going into that area.
Yeah, if we're adding capacity, we can. One thing to note, if you're reconstructing, you account for the current traffic that's out there. So the short answer is yes, if we're adding some capacity and allowing for more vehicles to go on there. But in some projects, like a new project's pretty easy. You can pretty much recover almost 100% of a new project. On an existing project, on a heavily traveled road, you might recover 10% of that project. But yes, you can use impact fees in that case, but you can only recover a portion of the project, and that's what math will be doing.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, that concludes the CIP plans, the 3 roadway and the 1 for water and 1 for sewer. So, John, it's back to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I know there's a whole lot of work that went into that during the master planning areas, and thank you for condensing that and bringing that to us in a concise way. Is there a motion to accept the impact fee capital improvements plan?
I'll make a motion.
It's been moved by Mike. Any second?
Second.
Been seconded. Okay. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Okay, that takes us then, we need the committee to authorize the chair to submit the comments and the acceptance of these plans to city council.
So moved.
Been moved by moved and seconded. Any discussion? I have one question. I'm going to get Vanessa or somebody to help me prepare that for presentation to council, right?
John, we already have a draft going, and so based on this meeting, what we'll do is we'll insert the committee's comments to that, and then we'll work with you directly to make sure that you approve of that memo, basically just memorializing what this meeting was, and then we'll go ahead and have that ready for to have that prepared for council.
Okay, and once we finalize it, I'm going to circulate it to the committee before I make that presentation, please.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. All right, thank you. Any discussions, questions, or comments? I guess we did a lot of that earlier before we got there and probably ran the bill up with our consultants this afternoon. But I really think we needed to kind of hash out some of those issues, John, and maybe we got them a little out of order, but everybody on this committee is very interested in the growth and the development of the city of Odessa. So we're just, and a lot of us have been here for a lot of years and seen a lot of different ways things are done. So I think it's good that we kind of got some of that out on the table.
Well, I think as you move forward here, now that we'll do the math, I like this little term, when we can bring the financial information forward to y'all, and you can see, hey, here's the projects, here's how much they cost, here's how you can potentially fund those. It's going to help y'all go, okay, I get that. I can make a decision on what I think the city needs to do.
And in light of that, Cindy, if you would help us understand what the water and sewer fund looks like and maybe some history of that, I think, and because it may be, and I'm just making up numbers, but it may be we want to do something like Lubbock and just not have a zero impact fee, but raise our water and sewer rates 25 cents or $2 or recommend that to the council in lieu of that. So, I mean, I think there's, and maybe that will be shown in our pie chart presentation next time, John, or is some flexibility in that? Is that?
Yeah, I think we probably get back with the city staff and finance and talk about some assumptions on that. Like, I kind of understand where you're coming from.
Am I off base, Dr. Goetz? I mean, that y'all looked at that from time to time. I know when you were on the council and paid for a lot of water development board loans by adjusting your water and sewer rates, if I remember right.
We did. We had to do that every time. We also had to build a couple of lakes for the CRMWD during my time, and we raised rates to do that. So it's definitely something that I know Cindy knows a hell of a lot about it, and we can definitely look at that.
Okay. All right. I'm not trying to run down a rabbit hole. Just thank you. Looks like we're moving along quite well. I appreciate all the Kimley Horn folks and the city staff keeping us informed. And our next meeting is scheduled for February
10th.
10th.
And John, just to echo what Michael mentioned earlier, if you or anyone on the committee has questions along the way, feel free to email them over to us and we will get you either the information that's needed to clarify those questions, or we can set up a call where we can discuss what those questions are. We definitely don't want you guys feeling like you're in the dark until we have the next meeting. What we can do in the interim to get you the information you need, we want to. And then we will definitely try to get you the information, if there's any information to present, at least a week prior to the meeting of February 10th. That way you guys have some time to take a look at it and be familiar with it by the time we get to the meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Vanessa. Any other comments, questions, input? If not, I'll accept a motion to adjourn. Oh, Cindy, you gonna say something?
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right. We're out of here. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it. Good work.
Aye.